David and Goliath, right? Does any of you remember what King Saul promised to the guy that would kill this big giant? He promised 3 things. He said, I'll give you 3 things to anyone who's brave enough to go out there and fight this big giant. Anyone remember? If you were a boy or a soldier, what are 3 things that you would need? You would need some money, right? He said, I'll give you lots of riches. Then he said, if you're not married, I'll give you a wife. Or he said, I'll give my daughter. Then he said, and even beyond that, I'll make your father's house free from all taxes. They never have to pay taxes again. So there had to be a brave soldier, and he had a lot on the line because this giant was big, right? But David, God was on his side, so David went out there and he killed the giant. Now we keep going. Do you think King Saul's going to keep his word and give David everything he promised? Probably not. Things change a little bit. They look a little bit different ones. The giant's not facing you no more. So let's see how the story unfolds. And it just continues to go, and I'm just going to get highlights on all chapters. I'm not going to read the whole thing. So first off, we'll start after in 1 Samuel 17 is where the battle happens. I think, yeah, when he fought with Goliath. Then now we're in 18. So it came to pass when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, this was David, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. So Jonathan was King Saul's son, and he would have been the next king, but God anointed David. And Saul took David that day and would not let him go home to his father's house. He would not let him go home. Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, gave it to David and his garments, even his sword, his bow, and his girdle. So here we see Jonathan was not selfish. He gave right there we see he gave him pretty much everything. Jonathan freely gave him his robe. What does the robe mean in the Bible, in the Old Testament? Can you think of anyone who had a robe that was significant? There's a lot of different times when a robe comes up. First person that comes to mind, what is it? Remember, it was a colorful robe. That's the first person that came to my mind. Joseph. And Samuel's sitting here when his mother took Samuel to the priest, to Eli, she made him a new robe every year. So the robe represents something. And we even, as we keep reading, Jesus, they put a purple robe on Jesus and mocked him. So a robe has a value in the Bible. It means something. Don't mean something nowadays to us as much, so we don't understand. But when Jonathan took this robe off, he gave it to David. Now, if we keep reading, we're going to, at the end of the story today, David is going to cut off the corner of King Saul's robe, and I'll explain more about that. So he gave him everything, or more or less, he turned everything, but they made a covenant with each other because they loved him. Even though he gave him everything, they were still friends. So here we see why Saul didn't keep his word, because when David went out, Saul went with him, and he behaved himself wisely, David did. So Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in all the sight of the people and all the sight of Saul's servants. And it came to pass, as they returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, that the women came out from all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, and they were singing songs. Does anyone know what song they were singing? Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed how many? 10,000. Well, all of a sudden, who was the better person, Saul or David? David. And King Saul knew this, and it says he was wroth, and the saying displeased him, and from that day forward, he eyed David. He watched him, not in a good way, in a bad way. So he started to become jealous. And it came to pass on the morrow that an evil spirit from God came upon Saul. So we were singing that song, born again, free for sin, happy am I night and day. That's if you're born again. Yeah, if you have a good spirit, that's how you feel. What if you have an evil spirit? Then you become like Saul, and you become angry, you become mad. And there were times when he would become mad like that, then he would ask David to come play a song for him. And do we remember what happened when David came in and was singing a song? And now he was in Saul's presence, and the people liked David more than Saul, and David was in there singing his harp. What do you think Saul did? What did he throw at David? A spear. He had a big spear in his hand, and not only once that day, but it says he threw it twice. I don't know how he got to throw it twice, but he says there was a javelin in his hand, and Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall, and David avoided out of his presence twice. So throughout what I'm going to teach upon today, there are going to be 14 attempts in all that King Saul tries to kill David. 14 different times, and he doesn't succeed. So I'll point those out as we keep going. Therefore, Saul, after he missed him with the javelin, he removed from him, and he made him captain over 1,000. So, but David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and what? The Lord was with him. That's why Saul couldn't kill him. Saul was a great warrior up until the giant, probably, and after the giant, after disobeying God, that all left him. Now David was a great warrior because the Lord was with him. So here, Saul seen he couldn't stab him with his spear, so he said, I'll make him a lieutenant, like a captain over 1,000 men. Then every time my soldiers go out to battle, David has to be on the front lines. Then the enemy will kill him. I don't have to kill him. But did that work? No, because Saul behaved himself wisely and God was with him. So David, that was his third attempt to kill David, but he did not succeed. So we'll keep going. And when it came to pass at the time when Saul's daughter should have been given to David, Saul gave her to another man. So the first daughter that Saul was supposed to keep his promise and give it to David, he did not, because he didn't like David no more. The king was out of his way, and Saul had become selfish. He was all for himself. And if he would give David all that, he knew David might become the next king and take everything from him. So he didn't give her his daughter, but Saul had a couple daughters. I don't know how many, but there was another one named Michal, or I'm just going to say Michelle, because it's the closest thing in English that I know. It's not Michael, Michal, I don't know what it is. But she loved David, and it pleased Saul because he thought, if she loves him, then, let me see how I can say it. He thought the hand of the Philistine would be against David, and he thought, I will use his daughter to get David killed. Because he knew David didn't have a lot of money. And back in the Bible times, if you wanted to marry someone's daughter, you had to come up with a payment or something to take a gift for the father so you could take the daughter. So let's say Betty would want to get married. Whoever Betty wants to marry, that guy has to give Eli a lot of money or a bunch of cows or something for a down payment. Well, David said, I'm a shepherd. I'm a poor man. I don't have money. And the king said, that's okay. I don't want money from you. You know what he wanted from David? He didn't want his money. He wanted him dead. So he said, go over in the Philistine and get me 100 foreskins. He thought, surely if David goes over into the enemy territory, they'll kill him. Well, God was with him. He was a mighty warrior. He went over in Philistine country. He not only got 100 Philistine foreskins, he got 200. He brought him back, put him before King Saul, and King Saul, he was then very much afraid because he knew God was with him, and it says he became David's enemy continually. And if someone becomes your enemy, what do you want to do with them? Kill them even more. So Saul spoke to Jonathan in chapter 19, to Jonathan and all his servants, that they should kill David. It was an order. He was the king. He said, all of you servants and Jonathan go out and kill David, because the Philistines couldn't kill him. No one, he himself couldn't kill him. This was his 5th attempt to kill David. So I'll pick up in verse 4, 19, 4 and 6, and let's see how Jonathan talked some sense into his dad. He said, Dad, don't sin against your servant David. He has not sinned against thee, and because his works have been good. Did he not put his life on the line when he fought with the Philistine, when he killed Goliath? He said, the Lord brought a great salvation for all of Israel. He said, you seen it, and you rejoiced. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to kill David without a cause? Then Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. So he thought about everything that David did, and he said, you're right, Jonathan, I won't kill him. But that only lasted for a couple days, because war broke out with the Philistines. David went out, and he slew them with a great slaughter. Well, then the king was reminded, oh yeah, David kills his 10,000. I've only killed 1,000. The evil spirit came upon him. And what happened? David had to come play the harp again to calm the king down. What did the king do again? Threw his javelin again. This time he threw it hard. And he threw it so hard, David jumped out of the way. It stuck right in the wall. He was going to. He wanted him out of his life. Well, I wanted to know, how can Saul throw the javelin 3 times and not hit somebody? So I Googled javelin throwing. I put it in YouTube, and they actually have competitions in the Olympics, other places, to see how far you can throw it. They didn't necessarily see how accurate, just how far. But there was one trainer that was teaching accuracy, and he said it depends on how you hold it, you can become very accurate. And he said if you hold it and you put a spiral on it, you spin it. You know how a bullet spins and it shoots straight? He said if you learn how to throw it straight, you can become very accurate. Well, I am thankful that King Saul didn't have a trainer, because he would have ended up killing David and Jonathan, because he threw his spear at Jonathan for sticking up for David. So here he missed David 3 times, and then we'll continue to read in 1 Samuel, now we're in chapter 20, that Jonathan, there was a great feast, and the King Saul said, why isn't David sitting here eating with us? And Jonathan stuck up for David and said, oh, Jonathan went home to Jerusalem. David went home to Jerusalem, and he was talking about David sticking up for him. The king realized, and he threw his javelin at Jonathan at the dinner table. And he missed him, of course. So Jonathan, will continue reading in 20:34. It says, so Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. His father did a shameful thing. He was trying to kill. At that point, we'd say mad. He was insane. And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad was with him. You guys probably remember this story. This was one of my favorites in the Bible when I was a little kid. Him and Jonathan, they made a covenant. They stuck together like brothers. So they knew that Saul was trying to kill David, but now he was also trying to kill Jonathan, because Jonathan was in the way from him and David. So they came together, and David told Jonathan, if your dad is really trying to kill me, let me know. And so they made an agreement that David would hide behind this rock out here, hide in the field somewhere. So David hid behind this rock, and Jonathan said, I will come out and I will shoot my bow. You guys remember the story? If he would shoot the arrows short, and the lad would come and he would say, come, the arrows are closer, that would mean it was safe. David could come out from hiding. His father was not trying to kill him. But if he shot beyond and he told the lad, run further, is go get the arrows, they're beyond, flee, go further, then that would mean David has to run and hide. So that's exactly what he did. He shot the arrows way beyond, and he said, Jonathan cried after the lad, make speed, haste, stay not. Stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up all the arrows, and he came back, and Jonathan gave him his bow and told him, take them into the city. So he left, and he had no idea David was hiding back there, because Jonathan wanted to tell David goodbye because he knew he probably wouldn't see him again. He had to flee for his life. So David arose out of the place, his hiding place. He bowed to the ground, and they kissed one another, and they wept with one another. So they cried. They were best friends. But they knew they had to part. So David was such in a hurry that he didn't have time to go back and pack his bags, get food. He had to leave because Saul was angry. He was throwing his spear at everyone that got in the way. So David hurried and flee. He ran into the mountains, ran and hid. Well, after a couple days, after a couple miles, without any food, you get hungry. So David came to this place where a priest was, and he said, I am hungry. Don't you have any food? The priest said, the only thing I have is this showbread that is for, they put it in the ark there on the side. It's for God. But he said, if you're clean, I'll give it to you. And David said, I'm clean. He was very hungry. And so he gave him the bread to eat. And then David said, oh, and by the way, I need a sword. I'm about the king's business. I need a sword. Do you have a sword? He said, I do have a sword. It's in the back. Can you kids guess whose sword was laying in the back room? It goes all the way back to the start of this story. Who did David kill? Goliath. Whose sword did he take? Goliath. And they were saving it. He didn't have any use for it until that day. So he said, I need a sword. And he said, well, Goliath, the guy you killed, his sword is laying in the back room. Go get it. It's like, it's good news. It's meant to be. David got food. He got a weapon. He was on his way. The bad news is there was another guy there, and it was like a lieutenant from King Saul's army. He heard and seen everything David and the priests were talking about. What did he do? The big tattletale went back and told King Saul, David was here getting a sword and food, and he went over yonder. Well, what did King Saul do? He pursued after David. So, actually, before he pursued David, he wanted to ask the priests if this is true. So, in verse 22, he asked the priests, he said, did you talk to David? Did you give him food and a sword? And Ahimelech answered the king and said, well, of course I did. He said, who is so faithful among all thy servants? And it's your son-in-law. Isn't he honorable in thy house? I didn't know he was lying in wait against you or rising up against you, because the king said he's trying to kill me all the way. It's the other way around. The king was trying to kill him. He said, my servant did not know nothing of all of this. He said, I'm innocent. I didn't even think. Like, I just helped him out. Well, because King Saul was so mad that anybody would help get David get away, he not only killed the priest, but he killed 85 priests. It says he slew that day 85 persons that wore a linen ephod. And the only people that wore an ephod were priests or their sons. So there were 85 of them. And Saul didn't stop there. He says, the whole city he smote with the edge of the sword, both men, women, children, oxen, donkeys, sheep. Saul has gone mad. Like, he is just killing everything. All he can think is to kill David, and anything that comes in his way, he's going to kill. So the only person who escaped was Abiathar, and he fled to David and told him what's going on. He said, Saul is killing everyone. So Saul was chasing David, and they came up to this mountain, and Saul went around one side, David went down around another, and Saul had a bunch of men. He actually had 3,000 men with him. So they cornered David up on the top, and they were closing in on David. They had him. And then a messenger came and said, hey, the Philistines are invading the land. And Saul had to turn around and go fight the real enemy, which wasn't David. Had to go fight the real enemy, and David got away, got down from the mountain and went to another hiding place. So we're going to finish up with chapter 24. We got through 5 chapters. I had about 5 minutes per chapter, so I got 5 minutes to finish the last one. So it came to pass when Saul was returning from following the Philistines, soon as he chased the Philistines out of the land, he was after David again. So he said that he found out David was in the wilderness, and Saul took 3,000 men and went to seek David and his men upon the rocks of the wild goats. So David went up really high. Wild goats live up high in steep, dangerous terrain. Now, how many men did David have with him? You guys remember? Saul had 3,000. David only had, one place it says 300, next place it says 600, so anywhere from that range. And when Saul came to the sheepcotes by the way, there was a cave, and Saul went in to cover his feet. And the David and his men remained in the side of the caves. Now, we just came from Virginia. I know you were in the cave, you were in them taverns. Let's paint a picture here. Saul is going up the mountain. He says, hey, I need to use the restroom. He says, you guys stay here. I'm going to sneak in this cave and go use the restroom. Little did he know that there were 400 other people in the restroom hiding. Have you ever went into a big restroom? There's a bunch of booths. You go in there. You can't see who's in the booths. You just go in there and do your business and go on. Well, Saul, because the cave, they had these caves, those taverns, all lit up. There were lights all over, walkways all over. But imagine if there were no lights, no walkways. There were big cracks. You could have hid anywhere in those caves, right? Anywhere. And it would be pitch dark. So Saul comes up with his 3,000 men, and he says, guys, you wait outside. I got to go in and use the restroom. And I imagine he walks in. He probably had a torch, and he goes in. The cave's probably pretty big. He's like, huh. And I'm just painting the picture that he took off his robe, and he laid his robe over here on a rock. Then he took his torch and went further back in where he could have a little more privacy. Then he probably set his torch down and covered his feet, as the Bible says. So David and his servants were there, and the servant said, David, look, God has brought your enemy into your hands. Do with him as you please. They were saying, Saul is chasing you. Here, you have him in the back of the cave. Go kill him. So what did David do? It says David got up. He went up, and he cut off the corner of his robe. Now, that's why I paint the picture that he put his robe on a rock. I hope he didn't have the robe on him while he was covering his feet, but it's a possibility. Either way, David was stealthy, and he cut the corner of his robe off. And then it says David's heart, something happened with David. It says, it came to pass, David's heart smote him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. Now, I think the temptation was so real. This was the 13th attempt that Saul was coming after David. David was getting sick of trying to get killed. Here he could have easily killed the king, and I think it was a temptation, but instead he just cut off the corner of his robe, and that means cutting off the kingdom, cutting off, he could have tore it in part, and it says his heart smote because of it. Then he told his men, the Lord forbid that I should do this unto my master, to stretch forth my hand against him, seeing he is anointed. So he stopped himself. But what he did when King Saul left the cave, David came out, and he yelled after him, and he told him how easily he could have killed him. He said, look, I have the corner of your robe. He said, this day mine eyes have seen how the Lord delivered thee into my hands in this cave, and some bade me to kill you, but my eyes spared you, and I will not put forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. He said, the Lord judge between me and thee, and the Lord avenge me, and my hand be not upon thee. He said, I'm not going to hurt you. Why are you trying to hurt me? And it came to pass when David had made an end of the speaking of these words unto Saul, Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and he cried. He realized he was so insane, so hard trying to kill David. And David didn't kill him. He said, David, you are more righteous than I, for thou hast rewarded me good where I have rewarded thee evil. So it's hard to end a story like this. I'm not sure where to go, what you guys can learn from it. The only thing, Miss Joyce had this stuck in there in this flannel graph lesson. And I think we can let our imaginations go pretty far with God's time and God's way. King Saul was trying to do everything in his time and his way. Was it working for him? No. David was letting God do it on his time and God's way. Was it working for him? Absolutely. So I think we can just run our minds across the story, read the rest of the story, see the outcome, see the beginning, and we can learn that God's time and God's way is always better. So until next time, we'll continue the story. You kids are dismissed.